Leave that up there. All right. All right. So last week we got into again the third step in the process. So by way of uh, for you, TJ, this is what we're going over. Is it's this little book by this author named Greg Kokel, and it's called Tactics. And it's the subtitle is something like sharing your Christian convictions, like a game plan for sharing your Christian convictions. So, how do we get into conversations with people and share what we believe, why we believe it in an effective way? Um, I've been thinking about this. I've read this book a while ago, and it's been around for I think probably about 10 years almost. And it's a good little book, but increasingly in our culture is going more the way of paganism than a Christian worldview. And so, what that means is, in a pagan mindset, it's more tribal, has a more tribal mindset. So I have my in group, and if you're not a part of my in group, then you don't matter to me. And so I'm going to do what's best for my in group, and if you may or may not be allowed into my in group, depends on the values culture of that in group. And so you just have warring tribes going at it until one god wins. And that's essentially what our culture is kind of devolving into. When you don't have a Christian worldview that has the value of every human being is made in the image of God and therefore is valuable, then what gives you value is your tribe connection. And if you're not part of the right tribe, then other tribes will take you out or cancel you or whatever, however you want to put it in our modern day and age. But when you mix in politics and it becomes this nasty brew that can deny conversation or say that anything that you have to say is an act of violence, right? Just words, using the wrong kind of words that don't fit within my tribe's way of speaking about things or way of seeing things becomes an act of violence, and then therefore certain like punishments can ensue, whether legal or illegal or whatever. Because then you can start within our context, you start making laws that make it illegal to say certain things, and then start getting ported off into prison for saying or doing things that you would normally go, that's not what our nation was founded on. It's like, no, it wasn't. And that's why it's going in that, or one of the reasons why that's going in that direction. So it is a process to get into these conversations, but also know that increasingly in our nation, since we're tending towards this pagan worldview, that having those conversations is going to be increasingly difficult. So does that mean we should not do it? Of course not. The gospel is true, so people need to hear the gospel. It will free them from this endless warring, essentially. Because, yeah, Jesus died for everybody, not just one little in group. So, step one is to first two steps are to try and understand what your other person is talking about, whoever you're talking to. So I know we do this every week, but what's the first model question? I'm gonna write it on the board. What do All right, so first question, what do you mean by that? Now this can be illustrated by a claim. So somebody give me a claim. It can be a claim about anything. Claim about the Bible, claim about God, claim about last time we did a claim about movie trilogy. It could be a claim about anything. It's about Star Wars. Oh yeah, you weren't here last week, so it was pretty good. Watch the video. Any claim. Jesus was just a good man. So that's a claim, right? Now, if you hear someone say that, and you'll probably hear someone say that if you get into spiritual conversations with people, we can ask this question. What do you mean by that? And what you want to do is you want to take the claim, so you have to be listening for claims, and then ask, what do you mean by something about the claim? So where would be a good spot to ask, what do you mean by that? With the claim, Jesus was just a good man. What do you mean by good? Asking about here. What do you mean by good? How is the person that made that claim defining the word good? Probably not the way that the Bible defines it. Yes, sir. Right. I know that's right. I was about to ask you. All right. Hmm? Oh, number two pencil. Yeah. Well, that's where it starts, right? Right. Right. Yeah. So that's where his behavior would back up the claim of that. Yeah. And compare them. So that's how you would go about defining good. But what you want to do is you want to get what the other person defines as good. And so by asking them what they would define as good. Right. So right. What do you mean by that? Well, part of this is you want to be able to understand where they're coming from and not make any assumptions about what they mean. Almost. So it depends. So you could ask about, what do you mean by good? I would add, you could also ask, what do you mean by he's just a man? What do you mean he's just a man? Did Jesus claim to be God? Like, yeah, he did. Well, if he's just a man, right? So now I'm kind of covering up good. Just a man. Maybe go into, well, actually, the Bible claims that Jesus was more than just a man. He was actually God in the flesh. And then ask them if that's what they believe, and then ask them for the reasons for why they do or do not believe that. Yep.
I have what got brought up to me because hey,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
and then
Nice. We could smile.
and he brought up, oh, like, how is he a god? If
Mm-hmm.
you, who are you comparing?
Hmm.
You understand what I'm saying?
Only kind of.
God's world,
That's true.
but me. And I thought of that. I was studying it up there, and I thought, why? Because
Oh, yeah.
where I'm going with it now.
I know.
You have
I gotta get to the second question. Yeah, no worries. All right, so after we ask about, what do you mean by something like that? Then you have an understanding of what they're getting at. What's the second question that we could get to? Well, and again, we're still fact finding. We're still finding information about the claim, whatever the claim is. Jesus was just a good man. How did you reach that conclusion? What reasons do you have for believing that that claim is true? And again, if you're asking a question, then that puts that person in the position of, oh, I have to provide an answer. So as far as getting into a conversation goes, conversations go back and forth. Welcome, gentlemen. Yeah, find a seat. And yeah, we'll keep going. Welcome in. How's it going? Excellent. Good to see you. All right. So, how did you come to that conclusion? That person should be able to provide reasons for why they believe what they believe. And so, this question gets at the reasons. Now, once they give you a couple of reasons, then you can start questioning those reasons or kind of circle around to, well, those are your reasons, but there might be an alternate explanation that ties those reasons together better. And let me show you that. Third question. So, have you considered that Jesus was not just a man, that he was actually God in the flesh, that he was who he claimed to be? Have you considered what the book of John talks about? Like, have you read the book of John? The book of John is all about the deity of Christ. And it shows 7 specific miracles throughout its narrative, proving that Jesus is the Son of God, the Savior of the world. Have you considered that? Have you read that? Well, I read it when and then fill in the blank with whether or not they've read it. But you can maybe go to the book of John and be like, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except by me. John 14. That seems pretty exclusive. Seems, in John chapter 3, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. And, you can go into, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in me shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Like, what? If you're going to get to God the Father, you have to go through the Son. That seems like, yeah, it's like, okay, cool. We can talk about the deity of Christ after that. But have you considered? Now, depending on what the topic is, and it could be any claim, right? You could use this method, this thing, to talk about religious claims, to talk about scientific claims, to talk about religious, scientific, historical, anything. Just asking people reasons for why they believe what they believe. Now, something that sometimes questions don't always work, and it depends on the conversation that you're getting into. What you may want to do is you want to introduce your point without being offensive and without using a question. Now, I say without being offensive, written like 10 years ago, right? Almost like a lot of times, if you just raise the question, it's going to be offensive to people. At that point, it doesn't matter. That's a them problem, not a you problem. And they might be like, oh, you're hateful. It's like, okay, just you go ahead. You can call me that, but it's not true. I'm just trying to get at what you mean by what you say. But if a question doesn't work, or it's like, I wish I could formulate a statement that I have in mind into a question. Again, if you use a question, they'll have to give you an answer, or they might just call you names. But either way, you're trying to pull something out of them instead of having to talk to them. So you might say something like, let me suggest an alternative and tell me if you think it's an improvement. If not, you can tell me where you think a better option is. Or, I wouldn't characterize it that way. Here's what I think is a better, more accurate way to look at it. Tell me what you think. So, using this as our example claim, Jesus was just a good man. It's like, let me suggest an alternative, right? And let me see if you think it's an improvement on what you think. Hello. Yeah, come on in. Come on in. Ooh. Yeah, find a seat anywhere you like. All right, and then sometimes when you're let's see, a couple weeks ago we went over the good person test. I'd be asking them about the definition of good. Kind of following up on that, someone who claims that you can have other ways of salvation, then you could talk about, well, what is salvation actually about, and ask a series of questions to get to the conclusion about Christ being the only way. Sometimes you want to set up the conversation in a more favorable way for it to, so it goes in a more favorable way for yourself. So, if someone asks you for your point of view on something, remember on these first two, if you hear a claim, these two don't require you to give any information about what you think. You're just trying to pull out information out of the person you're talking to. Then when you give this, you're probably going to get questions about what you think about the claim. And so you got to be ready to, give an answer for the hope that's in you, right? Or there you go. Sanctify the Lord God in your hearts. Be ready always to give an answer to every man that asks you the reason, right? In just a second. So here's what you do. If someone asks you your view on a controversial topic, so what would be a controversial topic that someone could ask you a question on? Yep, abortion would be a good one. Yep, marijuana. Anything political, right? So like, yeah, abortion would fall into that essentially, right? But yeah, that's more broad. Any kind of political claim. Homosexuality, pronouns, transgenderism, those are all like fraught, right? It's like, ooh, if I get into this conversation, someone might think I think different than what the cultural norm is. Whoa, look out. okay? It's okay to think differently than what the propaganda is telling you to think, right? That's okay. You just be able to share good reasons for why you believe what you believe. That's all. Now, they'll probably call you hateful, but okay, just take that as part of being alive. So, so the way you could set up a conversation, though, is about any controversial topic. Is kind of front loading a bit of information, set the stage for the conversation. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is you could say something like this. This is a personal question you're asking, and I don't mind answering. But before I do, I want to know if it's safe to offer my view. So let me ask you a question. Do you consider yourself a tolerant person? Right? Tolerance comes both ways, or it should, right? Oh yeah, tolerance is only one way only. Yeah. So do you consider yourself a tolerant person or an intolerant person on issues like abortion? And everyone's going to go, "Well, I'm a tolerant person." Like, or almost everybody will. Most people that you talk to, I think they'll probably be like, "I'm a tolerant person." They want, because that's like a good value, right? In our society. Like, yeah, I'm a tolerant person. Another way you could phrase that is it safe to give my opinion, or are you going to judge me for my point of view? Right? It's like, judge not lest you be judged, right? Well, are you going to judge me? Because like you're judging me with my point of view. Yes.
We need
We're about to get into it right now. Yeah. Yeah. Any of these things, yeah. So that's what you're trying to do with this question, is to avoid the landmines, right? So if you set up the conversation, or at least if you ask somebody this kind of question, you're trying to avoid the landmine that's going to blow up in your face, right? So I got one more. Do you respect diverse points of view, or do you condemn others for convictions that differ from your own? And it's like, whoa. Well, when you put it that way, it's like, yeah, I'm putting it that way on purpose, so that way I can say what I think is true, and hopefully you won't call me names. Once you start getting into the name calling, rational thought is just out the window. So it's like, all right, here's the thing about tolerance. And this is something that you know going into the conversation. And so, knowing this, you can ask leading questions to get to your conclusion. There's no neutral ground when it comes to the question of tolerance. You can't be neutral. By making a claim, I either tolerate that or I don't. That's a claim about Jesus being just a good man. I don't tolerate that. What does it mean to tolerate? It means you put up with it, right? You guys remember this in the early 2000s where, yeah, I'm speaking like I'm that old. But do you guys remember? There was like this giant campaign for tolerance, right? And it was really swirling around the homosexual marriage claim and all of that, right? It was just like tolerance, tolerance, tolerance. Like, is that what people really want? They just want to be tolerated? Like, think about that. You tolerate annoying music at work. If they play music at where you work, you tolerate it. Do you enjoy it? No, you're tolerating it. And what people don't want tolerance. What they want is love and acceptance. But if what you're saying, "Oh, I want love and acceptance while I'm indulging in my sin." That's no, God doesn't tolerate that. What does God tolerate? Right. Right. So it's like so when you make a claim, if somebody makes a claim, then when it comes to the tolerance thing, everybody thinks that their belief is correct. But beliefs are exclusive. So if Jesus is just a good man, then he's not God. you're still in your sins, right? The resurrection didn't happen, and our faith is in vain. 1 Corinthians 15. Like, if that's the truth, then everything we believe is not true. No, no. I'm going to give reasons for why I think Jesus was resurrected from the dead, and he's alive today, and he sent us the Holy Spirit. I'm going to give you reasons for that. Like, there's historical reasons for believing that the resurrection happened within history, and they're really good. They're convincing. And then if you give a positive answer from this question, from your questioner, then it will be very difficult for them to call you intolerant without looking intolerant. So if you set up the conversation as, hey, do you consider yourself a tolerant person or an intolerant person on the issue of transgenderism, for example, and they go, oh, I'm a tolerant person. And I go, well, and then I make my claim about transgenderism, about it being a mental illness, and that we shouldn't have children going through physical change, whether it's through hormones or through operations on their bodies. Children should not be encouraged to do that. And they shouldn't be led by adults who should know better into that. And then you go, you bigot, right? It's like, I thought you were going to tolerate my belief. Yes, sir.
On that note, I'm tolerant for the
Right.
Tolerance does not.
Right.
And tolerance able to discourse,
Yep.
disagree. That's really the difference.
Yep.
So it's interesting. Tolerance, really divergent view. They think we're tolerant and
Right.
disagreement is allowed.
Right.
Ability to disagree while still tolerating these 1,000% authentic.
Yes. And all of that, everything you like, all of that is undergirded by a Christian worldview. It has to be, because you're treating that person as an image bearer of God. When you do that, they have certain inalienable rights given to them by their creator, and I'm not allowed to violate that. Now, we can go back and forth in hot debate about what's right or wrong, or what we should do. But all of that is possible because of this assumption of the person's value and worth based on them being made in the image of God. Now, that is being undercut. That's what so you guys weren't here at the very beginning of class. I was saying that our culture and our society is drifting towards paganism, which is this warring tribes, essentially. And there is no tolerance for that, because if you disagree with me, then you need to die. Right? Exactly. That's exactly right. And so amen to all of that. Yes. All right, but the tolerance question is never neutral. And just knowing that, you can ask that question of, are you a tolerant person or an intolerant person? And then we can hopefully have this conversation, and it won't get like too crazy. Hopefully. Depends on how much of an emotional reaction draw out of the person that you're talking to. Kind of depends. So doing this process, getting into conversations like this, using these questions, and remember, this is just a kind of a game plan on how to do it. It's going to find its expression in the particular in a lot of different ways, which is okay. And you're probably going to feel like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just trying to ask a question and this person shut me down and I feel like I failed. Totally cool. Guess what? When I started rock climbing, I was really bad at it. But then I just kept doing it and I got better at it. And if you're going to have any kind of skill worth having, you're going to have to practice it over and over and over. And you're going to be pretty terrible at it at first. But eventually you'll get better at it the more you do it. You're not required to force a conversation. Like if you get to a point where you're just like, I have no idea what to say, or they make a really good point and you're like, oh, I've never considered that. Sometimes that happens too. You go, you know what? I'll have to get back to you. I don't know what I think about that. Can I have some time to think about that? That's totally fair. Yeah, absolutely. Hmm. Yeah. I need to think about this. Yeah. Right. That's exactly right. You're showing respect and you're showing love to the person, and that's a good thing. So Kokol in his book on page 83, he says, we may spend hours helping someone carefully work through an issue without ever mentioning God, Jesus, or the Bible. This doesn't mean we weren't advancing the kingdom. It is always a step in the right direction when we help others think more carefully. If nothing else, it gives them the tools to assess the bigger questions that eventually come up. So pay really close attention to the answer of how did you come to that conclusion, number two, and then ask yourself, is the conclusion justified by the reasons that they gave? And if it's not, then ask a question about that. Or ask yourself, is there an underlying assumption that needs to be exposed? So here's an example from my own life, my college experience. I went to college at Austin Peay State University in Tennessee, Clarksville, and I went to, it was the basic level biology class. So it's a huge auditorium. There's like 100 students in there. And we're just going, it's like biology 101. And of course, there's all this evolution stuff at the very beginning. And the biology teacher is going over the evolution of the prokaryotic cell evolving into the eukaryotic cell. Now, a prokaryotic cell is a simple cell, in air quotes, because it's really not that simple. But compared to a eukaryotic cell, it's very simple. It has no nucleus, no organelles, and it requires, at least what he was talking about, the prokaryotic cell that evolved into the eukaryotic cell requires no oxygen to survive. There cannot be oxygen. If there's oxygen, it oxidizes the membrane and then it just dissolves, and now you don't have anything. So he was teaching about this reducing atmosphere in the early Earth. There was no oxygen. There's lots of methane. Blah blah blah. He's going on and on about this reducing atmosphere and how there couldn't be any oxygen. Like, cool, taking notes. Prokaryotic cell, no oxygen. And then he goes, eukaryotic cells, they're very complex. They have a nucleus and many organelles that have a myriad of functions. It's super complex, and it requires oxygen to survive. So so it sounds like you're here at, actually, let me go this way because it's opposite. You're here at A, no oxygen. In fact, if there's any oxygen present, life will die. And then you're at C, where you have very complex cells. Where did all these organelles come from? And they have to have oxygen to function. You didn't tell me this middle part. B. It's almost like you went, prokaryotic cells, eukaryotic cells. Isn't that wonderful? And so I just asked him a question like, how did you get to, like, how does that happen? How is that possible if the exact thing that's required over here is death to the thing that's over here? How would you get evolution at all? That just seems like a non-starter to me. And he was like, oh, and he tried to give a little explanation, but now I'm tying up 100 students' time, right? And so I asked like one more question. He's like, hey, see me after class. I was like, cool, no problem. So class ends. I walk down there. I'm like, hey, look, I'm just really confused. It doesn't, like, that just doesn't make sense to me. And he goes, oh yeah, no worries. He tries to explain it again. I'm like, that's still, like, you haven't really explained it. And he goes, cool, I'm going to send you a link. What's your email address? I want you to read that and then when you're more educated, we can have a conversation. And I was like, okay. I was like, cool, I guess. And then he sent me a link, and this is before it became huge. It was a Wikipedia link. So I don't know if you were in college in the early 2000s or early to mid 2000s, Wikipedia was not a source you could use for anything. And I was like, this guy's a joke. What is going on here? But it was just a series of questions. Like, I don't see how you got from here to here. And we're doing the same thing if you're trying to raise an objection to someone's claim. Like, if their reasons don't justify their conclusion, then you go, I don't see how you got there. Please, do some more explaining. How did you get there? And then you can narrate the debate. And it goes, hey, people may not be able to give answers to tough questions, so they may resort to name calling or changing the subject. And if you have somebody else that's listening, I'll just quote Greg Kokel from his book, and then we'll be done. We have to get upstairs. So Greg Kokel on page 87, he says, by narrating what's happening, because people will be like, oh, you got me on that point, so I'm going to change the conversation, right? And people will do that all the time. Or they'll go, what about this? What about this? What about this? And it's like, okay, hold on. I want to notice what just happened. First, you made a fairly controversial statement, and I asked you a couple of questions about it. So far, you haven't answered them. And so if they haven't answered them, press them or point it out. Instead, you've taken off in another direction. Before we move on to another topic, would it be okay if we finish this old one? I'm really interested in your response. Go. If they go, I don't know. Cool, you don't know. Now we can move on to a different topic. But by narrating the response, which it was 2 weeks ago, we watched that Peter Boghossian atheist guy responding to a question, and then he got interrupted. And then he narrated exactly what had happened. And the whole audience was on his side because he narrated the conversation. Yeah. But he was also right. that was the kind of tragic part. So we'll get into more particular tactics for particular examples in the coming weeks, but these are the 3 questions that you can use to get into those conversations. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just very briefly. Interesting. Really do. Those kinds of questions. Fundamentally shows that it's an ideology, not something.
Right.
All these social issues are really. Shows something it's an ideology that's not reality.